What would you do if your dad publicly ranked your daughter as the least pretty kid right in the middle of Christmas dinner? I didn't yell, didn't curse, just said one sentence. But that sentence made the champagne glass in Dad's hand drop to the floor and shatter. Made my stepmother cover her face and cry. Made my 87-year-old grandfather stand up for the first time in 3 years, cane-free. This isn't just a story about a father protecting his daughter, but also about the price of staying silent too long, and about how sometimes you have to break something to build it back better. Blood is thicker than water, but I learned that blood means nothing without respect. Before I get into the details of this story, thanks for choosing my story today. Hope you have a really joyful day. Give me a like if you want to wish me good things too. Hello everyone. I'm Gavin Harper, 34, working in IT support for an insurance company in Portland. Stable job, decent pay, not rich, not poor. The kind of person who gets overlooked at family gatherings because there's nothing worth bragging about, nothing worth pitying either. I make $58,000 a year, enough to buy a small 3-bedroom house in Milwaukee, enough not to stay up nights worrying about bills, but not sufficient for my dad, Russell Harper, to introduce me to his golf buddies proudly. To him, success is measured by job titles and zeros in bank accounts, and IT support is better than unemployment. My car is a 2018 Honda Accord. It runs well and has no issues. Every time I park next to Dylan's Tesla, my little brother, 30, a software engineer at Intel, or Olivia's BMW, my sister, 38, a lawyer in Dad's garage, I feel like I'm wearing flip-flops to a cocktail party. 3 siblings, from the same father, but clearly not of the same class in his eyes. Oh, and I'm a single dad. For years now, not because my wife died, but because she chose to disappear. Tessa left when Harper was only 4, just left a note on the kitchen table. I'm sorry. I can't take it anymore. Don't look for me. I did look for 6 solid months. Then I stopped because Harper needed a dad who was present more than she required answers that would never come. Alright, let's get to the main story. Christmas afternoon last year, around 5 o'clock, I was buttoning my shirt in the bedroom when I heard Harper calling. She's 8 years old, with brown hair in a ponytail, standing in front of the mirror, wearing the red dress I'd bought her the week before. The dress fit perfectly, but she kept tugging and adjusting it, as if she were trying to hide something. Then she turned around and asked a question that froze me. Dad, do I look ugly? I wondered why an 8-year-old already knew to ask that question. I walked closer, trying to keep my voice normal, and asked her back, why are you asking that? Hearing my question, Harper looked down at her feet, voice getting smaller. I'm bigger than last year. I can see in the mirror. Her answer made my chest feel as if someone were squeezing it. I knelt to her eye level and said, you're beautiful. I mean it. But Harper didn't smile. She just answered me, voice like she was stating an obvious fact. But Sophia's prettier than me. So is Ava. Sophia and Ava are my dad's other 2 granddaughters. And Harper already knew how to rank herself against them. In that moment, I put my hand on her shoulder, trying to speak slowly so she'd understand. You don't need to be like anyone else. You're Harper. That's enough. After hearing that, she nodded but didn't smile. The kind of nod from a kid who doesn't believe it but doesn't want to make Dad sad. 25 minutes later, we were on I-205 from Milwaukee to Lake Oswego. Only about 12 miles, but Harper was silent the whole way. Through the rearview mirror, I saw her sitting, looking out the window, her hand smoothing her dress, her face expressionless. The Lake Oswego mansions started appearing on both sides of the road, each one bigger than the last, Christmas lights blinking as if competing to outdo one another. Then Harper suddenly spoke up and asked me, Dad, if Grandpa repeats something about me, will you be mad at me? Hearing her ask that, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and I asked back, why would I be mad at you? Silent for a moment, then she answered me, voice small like she was afraid someone might hear, because I embarrass you. I tapped the brakes gently, the car slowed down, then I turned to her and said, listen to me, you never embarrass me, understand? If anyone makes you sad tonight, we're leaving immediately. But Harper shook her head and said to me, but I want to go. I want Grandpa to look at me the way he looks at Sophia. That's all Harper wanted. Not an iPad, not money, just a loving look my dad gave his other 4 grandchildren, but had never given to her. I turned the car into the driveway leading to Dad's house. The mansion appeared behind the trees, its lights blinking brilliantly, and expensive cars filled the driveway. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Harper sit up straight, take a deep breath like she was preparing to enter battle. That should never happen to any child. Looking at the surface, my circumstances after growing up seemed really mismatched with where I was born. But that difference didn't hurt me. What hurt me was the way Dad looked at my daughter, like she was a stranger who'd accidentally wandered into a family party. When Harper and I got out of the car, the sounds of laughter and Christmas music drifted out from inside the house. She held my hand tighter than usual, her small palm slightly sweaty. The door opened. Victoria, Dad's second wife, greeted us and said to me with a polite smile, "Everyone's here. Come in quick." Then her eyes lingered on Harper for about half a second. Not malicious, but something flickered across her face, as if she were checking and evaluating. Getting into the living room, my dad was chatting cheerfully with Dylan about his new house in West Lynn. Seeing me, he turned around, paused for a beat, then nodded and said, "Oh, Gavin, not son, not you made it." Then he looked down at Harper, eyes quickly scanning her from head to toe, and said just one word, "Harper." Not my granddaughter, not "you look beautiful," no kneeling. Just Harper, like calling the name of a neighborhood kid who came asking for candy. Hearing him call her, she bowed her head slightly and answered, "Hi, Grandpa." Dad just said hum and turned back to talk with Dylan. I stood there, that familiar feeling rising. Not the first time, but it hurt like the first time every time. 10 minutes later, I watched Sophia, Olivia's 10-year-old daughter with blonde hair, run up to hug my dad 3 times. Every time he hugged back, he smiled brightly and patted his granddaughter's head, as if she were a treasure. Meanwhile, Harper stood next to me, not daring to step closer to Grandpa. Once, she timidly moved forward, about to say something, but my dad had his back turned, chatting with Sophia. He didn't even see Harper standing there waiting. She stood there for 5 seconds, then quietly came back to me, saying nothing. Just 5 seconds. But I saw her shoulders slump. Then came gift time. Dad walked to the Christmas tree, which stood over 9 feet tall, majestically in the middle of the living room, adorned with blinking lights and shiny golden ornaments. Under the tree, red and green wrapped gifts were arranged neatly, like in a Macy's catalog. He took out each box, all worth about $50 to $70 equivalent value. But the way he gave the gifts was utterly different. With the other 4 grandchildren, he knelt, hugged them, and explained each item. When giving Sophia her gift, he lovingly said to his granddaughter, "I remembered you liked building dollhouses. I picked this set especially for you." Sophia squealed with joy and hugged him tight. With Ethan, Ava, and Mason, he did the same. Each one got a story, a reason, and attention. And with Harper, he stood still in place, held the gift box toward her and said, "Harper, your gift," cold as handing out supply vouchers. Harper opened it, art supplies and a notebook. Dad didn't know if Harper liked drawing or not, because he'd never asked. She looked up at him and said, "Thank you, Grandpa." Dad just answered hum and turned away. I glanced at Olivia. She watched that scene, face briefly uncomfortable. But Kevin, her husband, took his wife's hand and shook his head slightly, meaning, "Don't cause trouble." She stayed silent and looked away. In the corner of the room, my grandfather Frank sat quietly observing everything from start to finish. I saw his jaw clench, hands gripping the chair arms until his knuckles went white. He didn't say anything, but those old eyes didn't miss a thing. The gifts weren't different in value, but the way they were given hurt. Dad didn't play favorites with money. He played favorites with looks, with tone of voice, with distance when standing near each grandchild. And Harper noticed everything. She didn't say anything, but she knew. Dinner started at 6:30. I told myself the worst part was probably over. I was dead wrong, because at the dinner table, Dad started talking. After the gifts, the whole family moved to the dining room. The table was nearly 10 feet long, covered with a pristine white tablecloth, filled with dishes, turkey, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and bread, beautiful like a magazine photo. Dad sat at the head of the table, Victoria across from him, while Harper and I sat at the far end, trying to swallow each bite while waiting for the next bomb to drop from Dad's mouth. But trust me, if I could still hold back at this point, I'd deserve the title Most Pathetic Father of the Year. Luckily, couldn't hold back. The first 10 minutes seemed peaceful enough. Sound of clinking silverware, cheerful chatter. Olivia talked about work, and Dylan bragged about his new project. Dad nodded, asked questions, and praised them. And Harper and me? We sat like two guests invited to fill seats. Then that piece ended when Harper reached for the mashed potatoes. Dad looked down from the head of the table, voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Harper, you should just have a little bit of potatoes." The spoon in her hand stopped mid-air. I looked at Dad and said straight out, "Dad, she's only on her first spoonful." Dad shrugged, answered me in a light tone. "I'm just reminding her. Potatoes have a lot of starch." Then he turned to Sophia, voice turning sweet. "Sophia, do you want some more of anything? Let me get it for you." I gripped my fork tight. Next to me, Harper put down her spoon and didn't take any more. My stomach felt like someone was crushing it. About 10 minutes later, Ethan suddenly turned to Kevin and asked, "Dad, why is Harper different from us?" Kevin quickly stopped his son. "Ethan, just eat." But Dad had already jumped in, voice like he was explaining a science lesson. "That's a good question. Everyone's different." Then he turned to Harper, asking with a concerned expression I knew was fake. "Harper, do you play any sports at school?" Harper answered quietly, eyes still looking down at her plate. "Yes, I play jump rope." Dad nodded like yeah, figured, then immediately turned to Ava, voice perking up. "Ava, I heard you're learning ballet, right? That's wonderful." Same kind of question, but Harper got asked like she was being called to attendance, while Ava got asked like she was receiving an award. Near the end of the meal, Dad looked at Harper for a moment, then spoke up. "Harper, your skin looks really dark lately. Do you spend a lot of time in the sun?" In that moment, I set down my fork a bit hard, and the sound of metal hitting plate rang out. Dad didn't bother to notice, turned to Victoria and said, like I wasn't there, "Look at her skin. It was much lighter last year." Victoria looked uncomfortable, stammered back to her husband. "Russell, stop it." But Dad kept going, turned to me and asked in a tone like discussing the weather, "Gavin, have you taken her to see a doctor? Skin like that doesn't look healthy. Look at Sophia and Ava, so fair and rosy." Unable to hold back another second, I gritted my teeth, looked straight into Dad's eyes, and said word by word, "I think you should stop this line of questioning right now, before I say something we'll both regret." The whole table fell silent. But Dad was different. He raised an eyebrow, voice challenging. "Are you threatening me?" I didn't back down, answered immediately, "I'm setting boundaries. Something I should have done long ago." Right when the situation was getting tense, the sound of a fork being set down from the corner of the room rang out. Grandfather Frank spoke up, calling my dad, "Russell." Dad turned and asked him, "What, Dad?" Grandfather looked straight into Dad's eyes, voice calm but cold as ice. "What are you doing?" Dad tried to defend himself. "I'm just asking about my granddaughter." Grandfather cut him off immediately, speaking loudly, "You're not asking. You're nitpicking. All evening you asked Sophia a dozen questions about school and friends. And Harper? 3 questions. And all 3 were about her appearance. Is that caring?" Dad's face turned red, and he raised his voice back. "Don't interfere with this." Grandfather shot back immediately, not backing down. "I'm your father. I have the right to interfere." In that moment, Harper gently set down her silverware, staring at her half-finished plate. Her shoulders trembled slightly. I put my hand on her back. She didn't look up. She just nodded lightly, as if to say, "I'm okay." But I knew she wasn't okay. How could she be? Dad looked at me, then at Grandfather, then around the table. No one was on his side. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Fine. Let's eat. I have something I want to say to the grandchildren later." I sat back down, heart still racing. I thought that was the final limit, but no. Russell still wasn't giving up. After the tense dinner, Victoria suggested the whole family move to the living room. I led Harper along, her minor hand ice cold in mine. Dad stood in the middle of the room, next to the Christmas tree, tapping his champagne glass lightly. Everyone went quiet. He cleared his throat and said to the family, "Before we end the evening, I want to do something special. This year, I've prepared a small certificate for each grandchild." Hearing the word certificate, my stomach clenched. I knew Russell too well. He never did anything without a purpose. Victoria brought out a stack of gold-bordered papers that looked like real certificates, with a worried expression. Dad took them, a smug smile spreading across his lips. I glanced at Harper. She sat up straight, eyes lighting up with a fragile ray of hope. She thought this time Grandpa would be different. This time he would see her. That very look of hope tore my heart apart. Dad started flipping through each certificate, preparing to read them aloud. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I jumped up, stepped forward, and snatched the whole stack of certificates from his hands before he could open his mouth. Dad glared at me, voice full of anger. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I threw the whole stack on the floor. 5 papers were scattered across the wooden floor. The whole family looked down, and they saw every printed line clearly. Most beautiful grandchild, Sophia. Smartest grandchild, Ethan. Most cheerful grandchild, Eva. Best behaved grandchild, Mason. And the last one, lying face up in the middle of the floor, least pretty grandchild, Harper. Looking at those certificates, Victoria covered her mouth. Olivia's eyes went wide. Dylan stood speechless. And Harper, she looked at the certificate with her name on it, her face going pale. And I could no longer keep my composure. I bent down and picked up that paper. My hands shook, but not from fear. I tore it in half. Then I pulled it again, shredded it into tiny pieces. The sound of ripping paper rang out in the dead silent room. Dad gritted his teeth, said through clenched jaw, "Gavin, have you lost your mind?" I threw the paper scraps at his feet, looked straight into his eyes, and screamed, "Lost my mind? You're the one who's lost it. You were going to give your 8-year-old granddaughter a least pretty certificate in front of the whole family?" Dad didn't back down one step, answered me in an ice-cold voice, "I'm just telling the truth." I took another step toward him, voice choking. "Do you know why she's like that?" Dad smiled coldly, dropped a line like a knife cutting into my chest. "Because she looks like her mother, and because you chose a worthless wife who abandoned you." That was like lighting a fuse on a powder keg. I screamed, voice breaking. "Because Harper is sick." The room seemed to freeze. No one moved. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears, and continued, "Harper has hypothyroidism. 18 months ago, I took her to the doctor because she suddenly gained weight. The doctor ran tests, and the results showed her thyroid wasn't functioning normally." I swallowed hard, continued, "She has to take medication every day. Side effects are weight gain, water retention, and darkened skin. Every month, she must visit the hospital for blood tests. 8 years old, scared of needles to the point of crying, but she still goes, because she knows it's the only way to get better." I turned to look at Harper. She was crying, tears silently streaming down her cheeks, but I had nothing left to hold back. I turned back to face Dad, voice trembling. "You know what makes her cry the most? Not the needles. But every time she looks in the mirror, she asks me, 'Dad, why am I different from everyone? Does Grandpa hate me?' And I have to lie. I say, 'No, Grandpa loves you.'" I pointed at the paper scraps at his feet, voice breaking, "But that was a lie. I told you she was sick. You know what you did? You just shrugged, compared her to the other grandchildren, then said it was just a minor illness, nothing serious. That's your love for your granddaughter." After saying that, I knelt, hugged Harper close, and whispered in her ear, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Harper sobbed in my arms, crying and saying, "Dad, I'm sorry." I held her tighter and answered, "No, never apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." In that heartbreakingly painful moment, Olivia stepped forward, tears flowing and her voice trembling as she asked me, "Gavin, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Dylan also stood up, voice lost. 18 months. I didn't know. I didn't answer. I looked at Dad. He stood in the middle of the elegant living room, face changing from red to deathly pale. The champagne glass fell from his hand, shattered on the floor, wine splashing onto the paper scraps. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I waited for him to apologize, waited for him to say something, But no, he just stood there, silent. And that's when Grandfather Frank braced his hands on the chair arms and slowly stood up. My grandfather, hunched back, shaking hands, stood up. There's no need for a cane. No one is helping him. He stood by the will of a man who had been silent too long. For the past 3 years, he has always needed a cane to walk. But right then, he sprang up like he was 20 years younger. The cane fell, clattering on the wooden floor. Everyone turned around, stunned. He walked to the middle of the room, stood face to face with my dad, and commanded in a voice cold as steel, "Russell, sit down." Dad stammered, about to say something, but Grandfather cut him off, voice ringing out with the weight of 60 years of being a father. I said, "Sit down." Dad's knees buckled, and he plopped down in the chair. Grandfather swept his eyes around the room, then spoke. "You want to rank the grandchildren? Fine. Now I'm ranking my sons." The room went dead silent. Grandfather took a breath and began. "I have 3 sons. You're the oldest. Then Thomas and Daniel." He looked straight into Dad's eyes, speaking loudly. "Thomas, your brother, is a pastor at a small church in Montana. Barely any salary. Rented house. Old car. But you know what? Every week, Thomas calls to check on me. Every month, he drives 8 hours to visit me. And every one of Thomas's children, even though they can't afford expensive gifts, all know how much their grandfather loves them." Grandfather took another step closer to Dad's face, whispered, "And Daniel, the youngest, struggling financially, sick wife, raising 3 kids alone. But you know what Daniel does? Every holiday, no matter how tight money is, he still brings his kids to visit me. Daniel's children hug me, laugh with me, tell me stories. Because Daniel teaches his kids that family isn't measured by money." Grandfather paused, voice choking. "And you, Russell? You're the richest son, biggest house, nicest car. But you're also the worst son I have." Dad went pale, stammered to Grandfather, "Dad, I didn't know she was sick." Grandfather screamed, "Because you never ask. 18 months. Have you ever called to ask about Harper? Once?" Dad was silent. Grandfather nodded bitterly. "No, because you don't care. You only care about appearances. About which grandchild is pretty enough to brag about to your old friends." Then he turned to look at Harper in my arms, voice softening. "This little girl is stronger than everyone else in this room. 18 months of being sick. 18 months of being treated like this. Still smiling. Still trying." In that moment, Harper sobbed uncontrollably in my arms. Grandfather turned back to look at Dad, voice ice cold. "Monday next week. I'm calling my lawyer. Your name is being cut from the will." Dad jumped up, voice panicked, asking Grandfather, "You can't do that." Grandfather answered without hesitation. "I can. $350,000, the house and savings, to be split between Thomas, Daniel, and Gavin. You get nothing." Dad screamed. "That's the inheritance you promised me." Grandfather nodded, "Right, but it's my money, and I've decided you don't deserve it." Right then, Olivia stepped forward, tears flowing, but her voice clear when she said to Dad, "Dad, Grandpa's right. I stayed silent all this time because I was afraid of disappointing you. But today I won't be silent anymore. You were wrong. You owe Harper an apology." Dylan also stood up, voice shaking but resolute. "Me too. I saw everything but didn't dare speak up. That was my fault. But today, I'm standing with Gavin." Dad looked around. No one was on his side. His face changed from white to purple. He lost control, screamed at the whole family, "Get out! All of you get out of my house." Victoria tremblingly called to her husband, "Russell." Dad turned to her and roared, "Shut up." My stepmother went silent. That was probably the last way for her to hold on to something, not to abandon the man she'd spent nearly 20 years beside. Grandfather calmly answered Dad, "Your house? I gave you the money to buy this house. My biggest mistake. But fine, I don't need this house. I need to speak the truth." Then Grandfather put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Take the little one to the car." I stood up, led Harper, and followed Grandfather out the door. Behind us, Olivia also took her 2 children by the hand, Kevin following. Dylan and Melissa also picked up Ava and Mason and left. No one said another word to Dad. The door closed. Through the glass gap, I saw Dad standing in the middle of the living room, with broken glass at his feet and champagne spilled across the floor. Victoria still stood in a corner, looking at her husband, both hands placed on her chest like she was trying to keep her heart from breaking too. I drove home in silence. Harper dozed in the back seat, eyes still swollen from crying. Looking at her through the rearview mirror, I thought the relationship with Dad was over, no way to repair it anymore. I was wrong. 3 months after the party, that was the time I didn't see Dad. And also, at that time, I understood many things I hadn't wanted to face before. After leaving the house that night, Grandfather returned to his small home in southeast Portland. I suggested he stay with me for a few days, but he refused. He looked at me, eyes still red, and said, "I've lived long enough to go through things more heartbreaking than this. I don't need anyone taking care of me. You take care of the little one." That night, when we got home, Harper wouldn't sleep. She sat on the bed, eyes swollen, kept asking the same question over and over. That made my heart feel crushed. "Dad, why does Grandpa always look at me like that? I want him to love me." I held her close, didn't know how to answer. I could only say to her, "Because he was wrong. That's Grandpa's fault, not yours." But I knew, no matter how many times I said it, the wound in her heart would take a very long time to heal. And that wasn't the end. About 2 weeks after Christmas, Victoria started calling me. At first, I didn't answer, but she kept calling every single day, so finally I picked up. Her tired voice came through the phone. "Gavin, your dad isn't okay. He's called everyone, but no one answers. He sits alone in the living room all day, staring into space. The broken glass from Christmas night is still on the floor because he won't let me sweep it up." I stayed silent. Victoria continued, voice choking. "One night, around 3 a.m., I heard him talking to himself in the living room. He was reading your old texts, messages you used to send about Harper. Then he said, 'She didn't ask if I loved her. She asked if I was mad at her, because she thought it was her fault.'" Hearing that, I felt a strange emotion rising. Not pity, not forgiveness, just a profound exhaustion. I said to Victoria, "Thanks for calling, but I'm not ready to talk to Dad yet." Then I hung up. During that time, I also began to understand what Tessa had to endure. I can't take it anymore. When she wrote that line, I didn't understand. Now I do. Every time we went to Dad's house, Tessa had to hear him comment on her appearance, her job, how she wasn't as good as Dylan's or Olivia's wives. 3 solid years. One night, I found her crying in the kitchen at 2 a.m. She said to me, "I'm tired of having to prove I'm worthy." I promised we'd visit Dad's house less, but it was too late. What surprised me was that, during those 3 months, Olivia and Dylan stayed in touch with me constantly, not to talk about Dad, but to check on Harper. Olivia called me one evening at the end of January and said, "Gavin, can Sophia and Ethan come play with Harper this weekend? The kids should be closer to each other." Dylan also texted me, "Gavin, Ava keeps asking when she can see Harper. Let them see each other, okay?" Every weekend, my house was filled with children's laughter. Sophia taught Harper how to bake. Ethan read books to his cousin. Ava and Mason played with Harper as if nothing had ever happened. Harper started laughing more. She started believing she was loved. Then one day in early April, someone knocked on my door. I opened it at 4:30 in the afternoon. Standing in front of me was a heavy-set man with a big belly, dark skin, a spotted face and messy hair, wearing an old t-shirt, baggy pants, and flip-flops. Took me a few seconds to recognize him. It was my dad. Turns out, after months of the whole family turning their backs on him, he decided to become a version of himself that looked like his granddaughter. To be stared at on the street, to be laughed at, to be treated as if he were invisible. In that moment, I realized he really wanted to change. Dad bowed his head, voice small as he begged me, "Son, I want to see Harper, just once." Before I could answer, the bedroom door behind me opened. Harper stepped out, looked at the strange man at the door, and asked, startled, "Dad, who is it?" Then she recognized him, eyes wide as she exclaimed, "Grandpa?" And that's when Dad knelt, at his granddaughter's eye level, held out both hands and said, "I'm sorry, granddaughter. I was wrong. That's all, no lengthy explanations." No excuses, just those few words. And Harper, like it was the first time he'd looked straight into her eyes. She stood there for a few seconds, then stepped forward and hugged him tight. I didn't understand what she was thinking. I wondered why she wasn't angry, why she didn't scream at him, why she didn't turn away. But it turned out I'd forgotten something. No matter what happened, she just wanted him to hug her, to see her, to love her as much as the other grandchildren. That's all. They whispered something to each other, but I couldn't hear clearly. I just saw her patting his back gently, while his shoulders shook. I stood watching that scene for a long time, so long I forgot where I was standing. Then suddenly there was the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. Grandfather Frank got out, Victoria following. Then Olivia and Dylan with their families were there as well. Turns out they knew Dad would come here today. Sophia was the first to run over. She rushed into a group hug with Harper and Grandpa, saying nothing. Then Ethan, Ava, and Mason also ran over, all 4 kids piling into his arms, creating a chaotic scene of laughter, crying, and children's shouts. My grandfather stood watching, nodded, and said to Dad, "That's the son I wanted to see." Victoria stood beside him, tears streaming down her cheeks, unable to say anything. And I stood watching Dad hug my daughter among the grandchildren. For the first time in 3 months, I thought this family would be okay. But there was one condition, and Harper was the one who said it. 1 year has passed. Life changed completely, and it all started with a question from my daughter. That day, after Grandpa apologized and the whole family hugged and cried, Harper still hadn't said, "I forgive you." She stood looking at him, then spoke up, "Grandpa, if I forgive you, can you promise me one thing?" Dad nodded immediately and answered, "Anything." Harper looked down at the ground, voice small but clear. "Promise you'll go to doctor appointments with me. Every month. Lisa in my class also has her grandpa take her to doctor appointments." Dad knelt, took Harper's hand, and said, "I promise. Every time. Never late. Never missed." Harper nodded. "Then I forgive you." And Dad kept his word. Every month, he drives from Lake Oswego to Milwaukee and picks up Harper from the hospital. He sits next to her when the nurse draws blood, holds that tiny hand tight. Every time Harper winces from pain, he says, "I'm here, not going anywhere." Harper doesn't cry when going to the hospital anymore. Now she's still getting treatment, but her hormones are much more stable. She's still round, but so much more confident than before. Once I heard Dad say to Harper, "You don't need to do everything to be beautiful. You're beautiful because you're Harper." Hearing that from him, I almost thought I was dreaming. Victoria still stays by Dad's side. She doesn't have biological children with him, but she treats Harper, Sophia, Ethan, Ava, and Mason like her own grandchildren. I realized love doesn't need shared blood. My family now gathers every Sunday at my grandfather Frank's house. Grandfather once said he'd cut Dad from the will, but after a year he suggested restoring it. Dad refused. He told Grandfather, "You keep it. I don't need money. I need family." Dad still keeps the clothes he wore that day in his closet, a reminder of the imperfect person he became. He says it's a reminder to himself never to forget the feeling of being looked down on because of his appearance, and to remind himself how big a mistake he once made. If the story taught me anything or what lesson it has for you, it might be 3 things. First, words have weight. A comment that adults think is harmless can become a scar in a child's heart. Second, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Harper forgave Grandpa, but he had to prove he was worthy. Every month. Every time I take her to appointments. Third, to understand someone, you have to put yourself in their position. Don't just look at the outside, or use your own emotions to judge someone, because unfair words and treatment hurt more than any physical pain in the world. My story ends here, but before closing, I want to ask you, if you were me and Dad ranked your daughter as the worst grandchild, what would you do? Stand up as I did, or continue staying silent? If the story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Harper is now 9 years old, still colors every night, with the art set Grandpa gave her that Christmas. She didn't throw it away, because it's a reminder. Even the worst beginnings can have beautiful endings. See you all in the following story. Thank you for staying until this very moment.